our second annual Belate Your Date, where we tell them, you belate your date one day. We will watch your kids free of charge here at the church, and you can go out on a date without having to pay for a babysitter. So if you have your child clearances or are willing to help out in any way, let me know. That's going to be February 15th. It is a Friday, but that'll be February 15th. We're going to start it at, I think, 5:30. And we're hoping to go till 7:30 or 8. I have to check my information. Like I said, I was supposed to tell you important stuff this morning. But February 15th, and so if you'd be willing to help out with that, that would be fantastic. For those of you that have your clearances, that's fine. If you don't have your clearances or you don't know if you do, talk to me or talk to Tamim Fenton. And she can help you get those. Tamim is the lady that helps check in all the kids back there at the desk. So go back there and find her and say, hey, I want to help out with Belate Your Date, but I'm unsure about my clearances, and she'll get you on track with that. February 15th, so please mark that down in your calendars. It's really simple. We just play with kids. That's all we do, and if you're like, well, I'm not really great with kids, we also sometimes make them dinner. So if you're great with PB&Js, then this might be right up your alley to make those. So please come and be a part of that. The other thing that I want to mention, which I remembered while I was talking, is next week, if you don't come to our 9:30 hour, our Equip hour, next week we're going to be talking about a topic that may be of some interest to you in this class. We have two classes that run in the mornings, 9:30 before this service. The one over in the room beside me here is studying in the Psalms, but the one here in this room, we're going through how to engage and impact our culture. And the next 2 weeks, next Sunday and the Sunday after, we're going to be tackling and addressing the issue of homosexuality and transgenderism, and how does the church interact with that? How does the church relate to that and understand it in a biblical way and approach that? And so maybe you don't have a class that you come to, and maybe that's not necessarily something you always do, but next week might be something that you'll be interested in, just to hear from the church's perspective, from a Christian perspective, how do we approach that in a biblical way, honoring God with our values and our theology. And so I'd encourage you, that's at 9:30. It'll be next week and the week after. It's going to take us 2 weeks to work through it. But I'd encourage you to be a part of that if you don't already have an Equip class that you go to, or if you can set aside time for us next week at 9:30. I think that's it. So if you're paying attention, we're in a study here in 1 Peter, and we're going to be looking at 1 Peter chapter 3. So if you grab one of the Bibles from the back, one of the tan Bibles, it's going to be on page 1570. Technically, there's like a line and a word on page 1569, but I hope you'll forgive me and you can figure out that it's on that one line is on the page before. 1570, though, it's going to be 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 to 12. I will tell you this, too. If you've been paying attention or noticing on Facebook, if you have the Bible app on your phone, the YouVersion Bible app, if you go there and search for events Bethel, Erie, one word, you will find the sermon notes and additional passages and all that stuff right there on your phone. So feel free to use your phone if you have the Bible app. If you don't get the Bible app, the YouVersion Bible app, and then look us up on events when you come in the morning, and you can see, you'll be able to track right along with us with all the different passages that we use and the sermon notes, and there's also some additional resources there for you too to follow up with. So you are more than welcome to do that. But 1 Peter chapter 3, we're going to be looking at verses 8 to 12. We've been studying the book of 1 Peter, but if this is kind of your first jump into what we're studying, that's okay. You're not going to really be behind the curve, and we try to give you a lot of context and a lot of help to catch up and be on the same page with us. So 1 Peter, this letter, is written to Christians who don't live in a Christian culture or a Christian society. The people that the author of this letter, his name is Peter, he's writing to, they don't live in a Christian culture where the predominant values are Christian, where the predominant beliefs and lifestyle follow Christian principles. In fact, the Christians that Peter is writing to live in a culture or a society that, at the very least, is not supportive of Christian beliefs or Christian lifestyles or values, which is why Peter writes this letter to them. That's the whole point of this letter, is because he wants to give them a guide for how to live in a culture that's opposed to, if not hostile to, your Christian beliefs or values or lifestyle, which is really good because we live in a culture that is opposed to and at times hostile to our Christian beliefs and values and lifestyle, which is, and if you were in this equip class in the last hour, Mike mentioned a few things that happened in the last week or so that kind of reinforced that for us, that if we were under any sort of illusion that we live in a Christian culture, then it kind of takes that away. I don't know if you paid attention to the news recently, but there's been a few things that happened that kind of reinforce that. The one is the media went to town. I don't know if you saw this. They went to town on Karen Pence, Vice President Pence's wife, because she went back to teaching. She's a Christian school teacher, and she went back to teaching in Washington, D.C., and the school that she's teaching at has a code of conduct or of values, because it's a Christian school, that the teachers must sign and ascribe to, that they don't support certain lifestyles or certain beliefs and those things. And so do they require their students to, which is normal for Christian schools to require Christian teachers and Christian students to sign a contract that says, I'm going to support Christian values. That's pretty normal. But our media discovered that this is a thing recently. They discovered that there are Christian schools out there that want people to follow Christian principles in their life. And so they let loose on Karen Pence for doing this, for following her beliefs and her convictions there. There was also another incident in the news just recently that you may have seen. Has anyone heard of the name now, Covington Catholic? Have you heard of that school now? Yeah, you didn't hear about it before until this week maybe, and if you didn't hear about it, basically what happened is there were these protesters in Washington, D.C., and this group of boys from Covington Catholic High School in Kentucky had gone to the March for Life rally event in Washington, D.C. to participate in that, and while they were waiting for their bus, there was this whole I don't even know how to describe it. It blew way out of proportion where these kids were attacked for being racist and all these different things, which in the end wasn't true. The only reason I bring it up is because what you didn't hear about is the March for Life rally. All you heard about were these kids who were degrading to a Native American veteran. You didn't hear anything about the March for Life rally, where 600,000 people, over 500,000 people, marched in Washington, D.C. to fight for the right of unborn babies to life. What you did hear was that New York I think one of the sickest things I've ever heard is the cheering and applause of a law that allows the killing of an unborn baby 15 minutes before it's born. But that's what you heard about in the news. We live in a culture that celebrates what we don't celebrate. We live in a culture that is not supportive of, opposed to, and if not at times hostile towards Christian beliefs and values and a lifestyle, which is good that Peter writes this letter. Peter's readers needed a guide. Okay, so how do we navigate a culture like this? How do we navigate life like that? How are we supposed to be a Christian in a culture that is opposed to Christian values? And so in short, what Peter has said, and we've covered this so far, is know who you are as a Christian. Know that you're a sojourner, that you don't belong here anymore. You won't be here long in this world because your home, your citizenship is with God. So fight the sin inside. Fight the sin inside with the help of the Holy Spirit and hold back the sin nature that used to be how you lived, because you lived under the law of this world, the law of sin. But that's no longer how you must live, because sin is no longer your master. So fight the sin inside. Know who you are. Fight the sin inside, and then live well outside. Live well in the world, among them. Let the culture and society scrutinize us, and let how we live prove that their criticism, their accusations are wrong. Because if we live well among them, we may end up one day worshiping God beside them. And it's important to note that if we do this, though, suffering will be unavoidable. Suffering because we follow Jesus will happen on the level of authority in government, It will happen in the workplace, and it will even happen in the home and in our relationships. And all of which Peter has addressed in the previous passages. We've talked about that suffering is unavoidable in all these different realms of life because we are sojourners in this world. And our values, our citizenship does not line up anymore with this world. And so he's addressed those in previous passages, saying that in those various situations of life, we must submit and we will suffer because we want to push people closer to God. And through our lives, they may see their need for him and worship him along with us. That's the purpose. And at some point, though, as we've worked through this, maybe you've thought this. At some point, you may have thought to yourself, okay, so you're telling me I have to submit to people I don't like. You're telling me I have to suffer through situations that aren't fun. Right? And so what's in it for me? Right? What's in it for me if this is what I'm called to suffer? If I'm called to live in a culture that I can't handle watching the news. What's in it for me then? And then you probably immediately, after thinking that, feel really selfish for thinking that. Like, I'm not supposed to think that what's in it for me. But honestly, who wants to suffer? Who wants to suffer? Or who wants to submit to people or governments that we struggle to respect? Who wants to do that? What's the silver lining in all this? And ultimately, part of the silver lining is that our time here as temporary residents is just that. It's temporary. 90 years is so short compared to when you put it on the timeline of eternity. It's just a little speck. That's hard for us to grasp. But 90 years, this temporary suffering that we're experiencing now, is far outweighed by the weight of glory to come. But there's more to the silver lining. Because we sometimes think, okay, but what about now, right? What about now? And there's more to that. And what Peter is going to tell us here is that there is something in it for you. So you don't have to feel selfish asking, okay, what's in it for me? I want to show you that you can, in fact, have a good life in a bad world. In spite of all the suffering, in spite of all the submission, you can, in fact, have a good life in a bad world. Now, don't call me Joel Osteen. Okay, this isn't that. I'm not talking about your best life now, right? Because our best life is going to come in the future for eternity. But Peter says in verse 10, where we're going to read here in a moment, 1 Peter chapter 3, that despite it all, you can still love life and see good days. So would you read with me 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 to 12. It says, finally, all of you be like-minded and be sympathetic. Love one another. Be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. Because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. If that sounds familiar, it's because Pastor Jerry read part of those verses this morning. So Peter starts in verse 8 with, finally all of you, right? He says that there in verse 8, finally all of you be. And because he had been applying 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21 to specific situations. 1 Peter 2:21 says, to this you, 1 Peter 2:12, So he says, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God in the day he visits us. Live good lives in the world. And he's been applying that to specific situations. And now he's going to bring it back to everyone. Finally, all of you. All of you. Now, we're going to come back to verse 8, where he says, finally, all of you. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. We're going to come back to that because the reason is, despite how it looks in your English translation, the main verbs and emphasis on this passage are in verse 9. The focus is on verse 9. In the Greek, the original language of this letter, verse 8, even though it doesn't look like it to you, it's all adjectives. None of it's a verb. And so the verb happens in verse 9. And so that's where we're going to go and start with. And we're going to jump to 9 to 12. And hopefully you'll see why we do that and how verse 8 fits in the end. And so verse 8, finally all of you verse 9, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. So this is the conclusion of live well among them. What do we do as sojourners? We know who we are, we fight the sin inside, and then we live well outside. And this is the conclusion of living well outside, living well among them. And all of Peter's applications are concluded here with this, finally, all of you. And so what Peter's saying is, okay, so here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm saying. Don't repay evil for evil, and don't repay insult for insult. Instead, you were called as Christians to repay evil with blessing. So to summarize everything he's been saying, how to live well among them, don't repay evil for evil. Repay evil because you were called as Christians to do this. Repay evil with blessing. This is the second time he said that. To this you were called. To this you were called. You were called as a Christian to do this. The first time, it was that Christians are called to suffer. We didn't like that very much. Or we didn't like the whole, Christians are called to suffer. But that's the first time he said it. The Christians are called to suffer unjustly and to suffer well. Now he says that Christians are called to repay evil with blessing. It's not an eye for an eye for us. Jesus said as much in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. He said, you've heard it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. This is Jesus talking. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. This is great if you're a brother, a little brother, and you can just throw this around at your family members, right? Hey, you're supposed to turn the other cheek. That's not how he means it, though. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. So Jesus said that it's not an eye for an eye for us. That's what Jesus is saying here in Matthew 5. When we respond, and I want you to hear this, when we respond to evil with evil, or when we respond to insult with insult, it only maximizes and multiplies the tension and the conflict. It just keeps building and building and building, because they'll retaliate to evil with evil. And they'll retaliate to insult with insult. And so then we do, and then they do, and then we do, and it gets building and building and building. And Peter is saying that the only way to break the tension, the only way to break that conflict is if someone is going to endure evil without retaliation. Because the only way to break the tension, the conflict, is if someone is going to endure evil without retaliation. And Peter is saying that whenever you're insulted for your beliefs, whenever you are insulted for your values or your lifestyle, whenever evil occurs in opposition to your lifestyle or your beliefs, not only is it part of your calling as a Christian to suffer and endure the evil without retaliation, but he goes further and says, you're also called to respond to evil with blessing. Don't just endure the suffering without retaliating. Endure the suffering without retaliating, and then repay it with blessing. And we'll come back to that and specifically what he's saying there. But here's the silver lining. Here's the silver lining. If we do this, if we endure evil without retaliation and then respond with blessing, if we do this, if we repay evil with blessing, Peter says we will obtain a blessing ourselves. You see that in verse 9. To this you were called, this is the end of verse 9, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. So if we repay evil with a blessing, Peter says we ourselves will obtain a blessing. And the blessing we receive is a good life in a bad world. The blessing we receive is a good life in a bad world. And to explain this, Peter quotes from the Old Testament poet king David in one of his poems, Psalm 34, specifically verses 12 to 16. He quotes them here in verses 10 to 12. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. His ears are attentive to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So you see there, if you want to love life and see good days. If you want the blessing of a good life in a bad world, here's the prescription. First, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from deceitful speech. Meaning, don't repay evil for evil. Don't repay insult for insult. We get that, right? Okay, I'm not supposed to retaliate. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't repay insult for insult. So hold my tongue, right? Keep my reaction back. We get that. It's hard, but it's necessary. Earlier, Peter said, but not only that, though. That's the easy part. Okay, which isn't always that easy, right? But hold your tongue. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't insult back when you're insulted. We get that. That's pretty straightforward. But what's even harder is that Peter says, no, you're supposed to then repay evil with a blessing. You go beyond just not retaliating, not repaying evil for evil. We're supposed to repay with a blessing. And so we see what he means by that here in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 11. Whoever would love life and see good days, first don't repay evil for evil. Keep your tongue from evil, your lips from deceitful speech. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't insult when insulted, but repay evil with blessing. Verse 11, they must instead turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. He says, turn from evil, don't repay it, but do good. Again, we have the option when people are evil with us, we have the option to be evil back. But that's going to just multiply and maximize and continue the conflict. So don't. When people mistreat you, don't mistreat them back. Don't get even. Don't shoot off that passive-aggressive email, right? The one that sounds nice but really isn't, and you're feeling really good about yourself because you really got one in there. Don't do that. Don't give them the childish, silent treatment. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't mistreat back when you're mistreated. Don't insult when insulted. Turn from evil and instead do good. Paul, in his letter to the Roman Christians, in the heart of the Roman Empire, which did not love Christians, he says this in chapter 12 of his letter. On the contrary, don't repay evil for evil. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Respond to evil with good. Overcome evil with good. Earlier in verse 14 of that same letter that we just read from Paul, he says to be a blessing to everyone, even your enemies. Don't curse them, bless them. And this is his explanation. So if they're hungry, feed them. Give them a drink if they're thirsty. Paul and Peter, the author of our letter, are saying this because it's what Jesus told us to do. Jesus said, don't turn the other cheek. If they ask for your coat, give them your shirt as well. Go the extra mile literally comes from Jesus. Right? Go that much farther to repay not just their evil, but to repay them with a blessing, do good to them. See, we like to think, man, if I'm just not retaliating, then I'm doing my job. That's not what Jesus is saying. That's not what Peter's saying. They're saying you're not doing your job. If you're just not retaliating, that's not what you were called to do. You were called to not only not retaliate, you were called to bless them and do good to them, which is very hard. Be a blessing to those who are evil to you and insult you by doing good to them. Kate sent me this. If you've never heard of the word meme, you're about to hear it. And if you don't know what it means, that's okay. It's a picture. Kate sent me this picture earlier this week, and I thought it was really funny. I don't know if you can read it, but this is the bakery section of Walmart. She didn't take this picture. She just found it. So this is the bakery section of Walmart, and there in the middle of it is one of those healthy choice meals, those frozen healthy choice meals, right? And at the very top of it says a decision was made, right? Where someone's walking around with this healthy choice meal, and they walk past the bakery section, and they look at the cakes, and they're like, yeah, right? And they trade it out. A decision was made, right? So there's this line of foods, right? They're called healthy choice, and so when this is kind of what this is like: repaying evil for evil or doing good. When you walk through the store, you can buy whatever you want. Or you can go through, you can buy whatever you want, but you're holding this healthy choice product, right? And you're walking down the bakery section and the cake section. You could choose the healthy choice option, right? Or you can swap it out. And so you're looking at what you have. I can choose the healthy choice, or I can choose the cake. I can swap. I can do this. You can turn from good and choose to do evil. When evil is done to you, when insult is given to you, you can insult back, and you're holding in your power the ability to be evil back. You have the ability to insult back, or you can swap that out and decide in that moment, I could be evil back, I could insult back, or I could choose to do good. You can swap it out. A decision can be made. Peter says, if you want a good life in a bad world, bless them by doing good even when you're receiving evil. Don't not just retaliate. I don't know how many negatives there were there, but do good in return. If you want a good life in a bad world, bless them by doing good. He also says, if you want a good life in a bad world, bless them by seeking peace. Verse 11. So if you want to love life and see good days, if you want a good life in a bad world, turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. Bless them by seeking peace. Pursue peace. This means go out and look for it. The prevention of conflict. Pursue the prevention of conflict with people. Paul, in that same letter to the Roman Christians that we looked at earlier, he says, as far as it depends on you, right? If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That's not just the people you like. Live at peace with everyone. Go out of your way to be a peacemaker with your hostile culture. It doesn't mean that there won't be times where we conflict. That doesn't mean there won't be times where I say things that they don't like. That doesn't mean there won't be times where I don't stand up for truth, but it means I must be gentle. I must be understanding. I must be loving. I must do all that is possible to live at peace with everyone. Go out of your way to pursue peace. Seek peace. That's what that means. It doesn't just mean do peace. It means go out and find it. Find ways to be peaceable with everyone. Resolve conflict before it starts. Repay evil with the blessing of peace. Do whatever you can to live at peace with everyone. If you want a good life in a bad world, repay evil with good. Repay evil with the blessing of peace. But you might be thinking, okay, so far it still sounds like I'm suffering, and it still sounds like I'm submitting, so how does this actually give me a good life if I'm just like taking all the bad and being good back, right? And I'm going out of my way to pursue peace when they're not. They're going out of their ways to produce conflict. Like, how is that giving me a good life in a bad world? It seems like it makes life harder, right? And more frustrating. If we respond with blessing, doing good, and seeking peace, then we obtain our own blessing. The blessing of a good life in a bad world. And Peter explains what this blessing is in verse 12. He says, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. If we respond with a blessing, then the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. That's the people that turn from evil and do good. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. The simple truth is, if I live life blessing my enemies, if I live a life of blessing even my enemies, then God will bless me. And the blessing that we obtain specifically isn't health, wealth, and prosperity. That's not what he's saying. The blessing that we obtain by living this way is that God's eyes and ears are on us, and he hears us, and he responds to us. Those phrases mean that God pays close attention to you. When you bless people who are doing evil to you, when you seek their peace as a blessing and don't repay evil for evil, when you do that, God notices you. He notices you. He notices how you are living life well among your culture, and he pays close attention to you. He knows you very well. He hears you, and he responds to you. He pays closer attention to you, and he responds more to you when you choose to live this way. Because living this way means I'm going to trust God with judgment. I'm going to trust God with repaying. I'm going to trust God with the retaliation. I'm going to trust God that his way is better, that he knows better. And when you live this way, you're trusting God with the results. It's faith, and it's depending on him. That when he says, repay evil with blessing, then I'm trusting him. Okay, then you've got this. If I'm going to do good to somebody that I don't like or that I don't respect, then you must have a better plan. You must have a bigger purpose. So I'm going to trust you with that. Because God says, do good to them and pursue peace. It takes a lot of faith in God and the reliability of what he says to buy your boss a gift card at Christmas when they cut back your hours just because they don't like you. It takes a lot of faith in God to do that. It takes a lot of trust in God when someone insults you or criticizes you unfairly to let it go and compliment them the next time you see them. Because it's not just not repaying evil for evil, it's also doing good. And it takes a lot of faith in God to say, I don't want to do this, but you've told me I should, and so I will. I'll do good. I won't repay evil for evil. And Peter says if you live your life that way, then God pays close attention to you. He responds to you closer than those who don't. And living a life where God is responsive and close is a good life. Living a life where God responds to you and his presence is close is a good life. It is a life you can love, and it is a life that you can feel content with and look on and say, the days are good. I live in a bad world, but my life is good because God is close and responsive. And he has said, if you repay evil with blessing, I will listen to you, I will be close to you, I will hear you, I will see you, I will know you, I will respond to you, and that is a good life in a bad world. Living life this way, though, isn't easy. But to this you were called, to repay evil with blessing. As Christians, sojourners, we were called to suffer, and we were called to repay evil with blessing. And some of us maybe have gotten good at not repaying evil with evil. Well, now we need to get good at repaying evil with blessing, which is hard. But we were called to this, to repay evil with blessing. We were called to be salt to the tasteless and light in darkness. Matthew chapter 5 says this, that you are the salt of the earth, meaning you are meant to give taste to the tasteless, to be among them, to bless them and be good to what isn't tasteful. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand. It gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, you let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds in an evil world, in a dark world, and glorify your Father in heaven because of what they see you doing. We were called to this, to be a blessing, to not put that light under a basket or hide it just because we don't like the world that we live in. To not give flavor to the flavorless because we just don't like the world that we live in. We were called to be salt to a tasteless world. We were called to be light to a very dark world. We were called to bless when given evil. So because living life that way that we are called to is hard, but necessary to have a good life in a bad world, I think that brings us back to verse 8. Remember, we skipped it. Verse 8 says, finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Right there, Peter says, with each other, right? If you're going to go out and you're going to bless an evil world, you're going to do good to an evil world, you're going to pursue peace to an evil world, he says, with each other, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate, be humble. And I want to take the opposite of those for a moment to try to see if we can get a good idea of what Peter really means here, so we can see what he's saying. So the opposite of what he's saying is, in this family, in this room, in the church, not just this room, but with the other like-minded churches around us, right? What he's saying is, don't be divided and divisive. Don't be heartless and not understanding with each other. Don't be cold and hateful. Don't be insensitive. Don't be selfish with each other. Why? We don't need those things here. We get enough of it from the rest of the world because it is evil. Because the rest of the world is so evil, we need to leave those things out. We don't need that here. Right? We get enough of it out there. It's difficult enough to take the evil and the insults of the world and live well among them. Don't compound it by bringing divisiveness, insensitivity, selfishness, and the rest into the church. We fight it enough out there. We work hard enough out there to respond to insensitivity and selfishness and divisiveness with good that we don't want to have to work on that in here. We should be the opposite here. We get enough of it outside. Instead, what we need most from each other is like-mindedness. Better to say maybe in that word, to live in harmony with each other. This doesn't mean that we agree on everything. It means be unified. It doesn't mean be unified in opinion. It means be unified in purpose. Be in harmony with how you have purposed to live and minister together. This like-minded, the better sense is harmony. And when you hear harmony in songs, they're not all singing the same thing. They're just singing things that fit together. Right? It's not unity in exactly what we think. It's unity in purpose, so it creates a harmony of all of our melodies. Right? We live in discord with the rest of the world. So we must live in harmony together. What we need from each other is sympathy. That's what verse 8 says. Be like-minded, be sympathetic. We need sympathy, sharing in each other's feelings, sensitive to each other's spiritual emotions. The world doesn't care how you feel or even understand how you feel. We do. We do. You're going to live in an evil world where you're going to have to do good to people who don't understand how you feel. So when we come together as a church and interact with each other as a church, let's be sympathetic to that. Let's be sympathetic to each other and understand emotionally how people feel and understand them. What we need from each other is love. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, love unconditionally as brothers and sisters. I want to remind you what love is. 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It doesn't dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Jesus said that this is one of the ways the world will know we follow him, by how we love. The world hates. The world does the opposite of this. The world is not patient. The world is not kind. It is envious. It does boast. It is proud. It does dishonor others. It is self-seeking. It is easily angered. It does keep records of wrong. And Peter says, here, we're not going to do that. Here, we're going to love. Because you're going to be repaying with blessing people who do this. People who do keep account of the wrong suffered. The world only loves selfishly. The world hates. Here we love unselfishly. What we need from each other is compassion. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate. Be understanding and sensitive to what others need. The world is insensitive, only self-serving, only worried about what they need. Here, we must be understanding and sensitive to the needs of the people around us. And what we need from each other is humility. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate, and be humble. We need humility. Peter's word here means have a deep sense of one's littleness. Have a deep sense of your littleness. He says humility works this way, Paul does in Philippians chapter 2. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Nothing selfishly, nothing out of vanity. That's humility. Everything the world does is out of selfish ambition or vanity. Not here. Not here. Here we see the inherent value of each person because they were made in God's image. Because he saw them as so valuable, he gave his son for them. And if he saw them as so valuable that he gave his son for them, then we can give up for them too. We can give it up for each other too. Here we will be humble. Here we approach things with humility. We were called to live a life of repaying evil with blessing, which is not easy. If we're going to live a life of repaying evil with blessing, then that means we will be blessing people, and we will be blessing a culture that is divisive, it is heartless, it is cruel, it is cold, it's hateful, it's insensitive, it's selfish, and it's vain. Because of that, we don't need any of that here. Here we live in harmony. We're sympathetic, we love, we're compassionate, and we're humble. And if we treat each other that way, we empower each other to live life the way that we were called to live in a culture that is opposed to, hostile to, not supportive of our Christian values, beliefs, and lifestyle. And when we live life that way together, we empower each other to bless a cruel world. And if we live a life blessing a cruel world, God promises us we will have a good life in a bad world. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for giving us the examples that we need of selflessness, of humility, of sensitivity, of all those things. And please help us to live that way here so that we are empowered to go live well among our world, that we find those ways to be a blessing, to do good when insulted or when evil is done to us, and seek peace and pursue peace in our world. Help us to know how to handle those issues and handle ourselves in a way that blesses others, and so then we can live a life knowing that you are responsive and close to us. And God, I just pray that you work in our hearts, that if we don't know you in that way, and that we're still working on developing our understanding of you and our relationship with you, would you please help us to take steps forward in that this morning? And I pray this all in your name.